All right, take two. Sorry about that, Glof. Take it away.
Totally fine. So my name is Matt or Glof. I probably I'm a bit prevalent in the comment sections of kind of the YouTube religious community, and so I'll just give a little bit of background, kind of about myself and kind of my own expectations for this conversation. So I am a cradle Catholic. I've been went to K through 8 Roman Catholic school. I had it was kind of odd because when I was in grade school, I wasn't particularly like religious, and it was actually my worst subject. And I was, took some probably contra religious opinions to a lot of my classmates at the time. It wasn't even a very trad school or anything, but just a little bit of my background. And then I had a period of like agnosticism in high school and college. And then there were some periods where I floated with like New Age spirituality, and then also Buddhism I was pretty into for a time. And then, kind of looking more into like Neoplatonism and kind of some other, alternative spiritualities. And, I kind of came back to the faith very lightly around 5, 6, 7 years ago, roughly. And then gradually from there, I kind of investigated it more and more and more alongside other faiths like Orthodoxy and Protestantism and Islam and Neoplatonism in general. And then I gradually kind of became a little bit more and more convicted of it. So that's more or less kind of where I stand today. I would not call myself like a rad trad or anything. I went to a Novus Ordo mass this morning. I'm not. That doesn't mean I'm like a fan of liturgical abuse or anything. But just for the context of this conversation, so just to give the audience some background, I'm probably well known among some people in some comment sections. I promise I think I'm a nicer person in real life than I am in those comment sections.
Me too.
Because
Me too.
there's an element of dehumanizing, and then I don't know, I get passionate, and I think YouTube comment sections are really not the appropriate place for these type of ecumenical conversations. So and it causes an element of dehumanizing, which can turn into a lack of charity, and it kind of in a sense brings out the worst of almost all parties involved. So so Kevin here and I kind of got into a conversation on his video, and I think there were times where I wasn't super nice, and I apologize, Kevin. But
There's times when I'm not super nice either, so no apologies needed. Like the word dehumanize perfectly fits what happens in like YouTube comment sections. So no apologies.
So you see a screen and you see words that you just disagree with, and then you're just like, these words, I gotta fight the words, and you don't see the person behind the screen. But anyway, for the purpose of the conversation, Kevin and I got into an argument or like a discussion on his channel. He posted a clip kind of about the kind of the epistemology of the Roman Catholic Church, and in his video he mentioned that it had to do with the concept of the Roman Catholic concept of dogma and kind of how it relates to science. And your position, and correct me if I'm wrong, your position in the video was that these two concepts did not link together well within the Roman Catholic system. So the concept of the dogma was antithetical to the concept of scientific inquiry, and these really couldn't be reconciled within the system. Is that an accurate representation of what you were saying?
Yes. If I was going to kind of distill my point of view into like one sentence, it would just be that the concept of dogma is anti-intellectual.
Okay.
That's the one sentence. And then if I was to expound upon that with like two sentences or something, it would be something like the idea that there are certain ideas that you will not change your opinion on no matter what is anti-intellectual.
Okay.
So that's kind of it. Okay. And just to let you know where this comes from, and also just to let you know, I have two cameras, one here and one here. So in the recording, I'm going to be making eye contact with you, even though I'm not making eye contact with you now up there.
Okay.
But I'm actually fairly active over on the Debate a Catholic subreddit. Yeah. So maybe just one sentence worth of history about me. I grew up like rad trad Catholic. I grew up in an FSSP church. And for those who don't know, the FSSP is an offshoot of the SSPX. When the SSPX got excommunicated, the FSSP got back in line with Rome. So like the FSSP was kind of like never in weird communion with Rome. They were always in line with Rome. And My grandparents founded the church that I attended growing up. My cousin is in the seminary to be a priest. My brother attended the seminary but discerned out. So religion is like a really big deal in my household. I went to school in the basement of that church for 1st through 8th grade. So I attended mass 6 days a week, every day but Saturday. And on Saturdays, I went to confession. So I was at that chapel, which was only a mile down the road from where I grew up, like 7 days a week. My only friends were through that chapel. So this really was my whole life. When I was in my like early 20s, I started realizing that I didn't agree with certain like Aristotelian concepts, namely like the big two that kind of the big one that kickstarted everything was just teleology. And so when I realized that I didn't believe in teleology, I kind of started exploring other things. And when I realized that I didn't agree with like enough stuff, I realized I couldn't call myself Catholic anymore. So I went through I went from rad trad to like nominally Catholic to like merely Christian a la C.S. Lewis to like theistic but not necessarily Christian to like deistic to just today I just call myself an agnostic. I lean on the side of there is no God because it doesn't seem that way to me, but I don't have like some kind of argument that can be like, I can't prove a negative because I don't think that anybody can.
Gotcha.
So
you're kind of functionally agnostic. You're not like a mere Christian or anything like that. So
no, I don't attend a church service, even though I would like to. That's a whole other topic that maybe we want to get into, but that's my 2 seconds of like history. So I've been like agnostic, for lack of a better term, for like 4 years now. I was Catholic up until my like early-ish 20s.
Not too bad.
And so in the comments, so just to give the audience a little bit of context too, Glof here was responding to probably a video that I made that probably came across the wrong way. I really do try to be like friendly about all my conversations, but the video that Glof was responding to was, I've heard that shorts are like how you grow your channel now. So I made a short, so I only have 60 seconds to get in all this information. So it probably came across as kind of aggressive, right? It might have come across as a little bit aggressive.
That's kind of, that's kind of the way that it's kind of going now, kind of the TikTok style like stuff in order to like, because that's just how people are communicating with these video platforms now. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, but I kind of hate the short form content because you lose you lose what we're doing right now. You know? Like
and it's so easy to misconstrue somebody, and it's, I don't know, sometimes it's done out of lack of charity, other times it's done like purely out of, ignorance more or less, so you don't fully kind of understand kind of the full context. So no, it's, I don't know. I have my qualms with it, but I like the long form stuff.
Yeah, and like when I'm kicking off the conversation in a 60-second video, and then you're responding to my 60-second video in a comment box that's this big. Like, that's not a real way to have a conversation, Like, anyway, all of that aside.
No, I think we're on the same page here. It's not, this isn't really, I'm not coming to this in terms of a debate. I'm coming to this in terms of a dialectic. So I want to work with you on kind of finding out what exactly it is that's true. So that's more or less kind of where I'm coming from.
Same. Exact same. I kind of hate debates. Like, I kind of hate like the formal debate, at least. Like, I don't hate the concept of like, disagreeing and having a conversation about it. But I hate like I have a 15-minute opener and then you have a 15-minute opener and then like that's what I kind of hate. So
yeah, those things I think they have their place. But if you're kind of, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of the blood sports type thing, like debate me bro. It's just like, it's not really, it's more a demonstration of will over it is genuine intellect. So it's like, and then it turns into a cheerleading match where it's a sports team, one versus the other. But that's more or less kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, it sounds like we're on the same page then when it comes to like having conversations and just trying not to be jerks in general. But so with that, I guess let me kind of backtrack to my current stance. Oh, and so I'm active on Debate a Catholic.
Okay. I haven't been on the Debate a Catholic. I've been active on, there was one, I'm active in like YouTube comment sections. Then I've been active on the Catholicism subreddit.
Okay.
YouTube comments. I think I was debating several people on ex-Catholic as well. So that's largely kind of, I guess I'm fairly acquainted with, kind of the debate spheres, if you want to call it that. So,
but this YouTube short that I put together was essentially just the summary of a longer post that I did on Debate a Catholic. So that post on Debate a Catholic essentially went as follows. I'll just kind of give you the abbreviated version of it, and then maybe we want to kind of go back and forth and just get each other's thoughts and stuff.
Yeah. Do you have a link to it? Maybe you can pull that up. Maybe I can read it kind of fairly quickly.
I'm gonna put the camera on me because I'm sharing my screen, so like I don't want to pull up like my Reddit for the whole world to see necessarily, but I will send you the link. And I guess we could just link. I don't care if people know my Reddit handle. I guess. I'm pulling it up now, but while I'm pulling it up, I'll just tell you about it. The main gist of the argument was this: anti-intellectualism is hostility towards like intellectual pursuits. So, and we might disagree on what anti-intellectualism entails. So that's going to be important too. But the main gist of the argument was something like it's anti-intellectual to have any belief that you're not willing to change your mind on no matter what. And the Catholic Church has many such things that it will never change its mind on. The Catholic Church calls those things dogma. And according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, dogma is like something to which Catholics are, I forget the exact language that they use, but it's something like bound, or they use words like must. So the Catholic Church makes it clear, and you won't disagree with this, I don't think. The Catholic Church makes it clear that dogma is not up for debate. Like dogma is settled.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And so I just think that the idea that there's anything that is settled is anti-intellectual. That's kind of the main thing. I grabbed the link and I'm going to put it in the chat now. Here it is.
So I'll just offer a quick response, just so we're kind of like kind of expounding on the definition of dogma. I was kind of reviewing New Advent in the Catholic Encyclopedia, which I think should largely be found in the Catechism. I don't have my Catechism handy, but with regards to dogma, I believe it pertains specifically to a revealed truth. So maybe a truth outside of considered what is largely natural. And then what else was I going to say? So according to a longstanding, this is from New Advent, according to a longstanding usage, a dogma is now understood to be a truth appertaining to faith or morals revealed by God, transmitted from the apostles in the scriptures or by tradition, and proposed by the church for the acceptance of the faithful. So you did get it largely right in that it's not something that's up for debate, but what isn't up for debate is largely, it pertains to a very specific kind of truth. So it's not what I would call scientific truth, or it's kind of in contrast to that, like revealed truth.
We might want to get into a little bit of what we mean by words like truth, because I wouldn't accept that there's a difference between scientific truth and any other kind of truth. Like I would either argue that things are true or they're not true. And there's no such, like there is no one thing that is like it is scientifically true, but it's not true in another sense. Like I would reject that definition of the word true. So maybe my best like move here is to ask you what you mean when you say, or what you mean when you differentiate between scientific truth and then like a moral truth or something like that.
So that's a great question. So with regards to scientific truth, you kind of have to look at epistemology as a whole. So, there's like empiricists like Hume, and then kind of the entire scientific enterprise deals largely with what is considered natural. So what does this mean? It means, from my understanding, is that science, and kind of how I've always understood science, is that it is used as a descriptive to kind of observe and make hypotheses about what is considered descriptive or natural. With regards to moral truths or questions of ought, science that's not really the realm of science. So science can't tell you something, for instance, like murder is wrong. It can tell you the rate of countries that have, the highest and lowest murder rates and factors that can contribute to these, but it itself cannot tell you that murder is wrong. And then, so that is kind of what the distinction is there. Science necessarily cannot be prescriptive or have any normative quality to it, which I think our definition of normative was kind of a subject of contention in the comment section as well. So that's kind of what I understand to be science. So to go back to your original point, is that science, there needs to be some sort of distinction between a scientific truth and then other types of truth. Because if all truth is a scientific truth, then the question, or then the statement, all truth is a scientific truth, would be definitionally a scientific truth, which it cannot be. That statement cannot be proved scientifically. So that's what's called scientism, and it gets definitionally very recursive. So I'm assuming you're familiar with like scientism.
Yeah, it might be worth me telling you just a second of context about me. So
Okay.
I'm an engineer. Like, I went to engineering school and stuff. So
Yep.
I have like a real bias towards the empirical.
Okay.
I try to work against it as best I can, but it's going to come through in this conversation. I can just tell. So you should know that I'm an engineer.
You're fine.
Just be aware.
Just so look, my own professional career, I am a CPA. So I deal with specifically business valuation, but a tax background. So I deal very much largely with the legal system. I'm actually taking a test later this week on financial forensics. So I'll likely be doing expert witness type stuff and understanding the legal system, probably not as much as an attorney, but more than the average Joe. So
cool.
So that's a largely kind of where my brain will come from. And within the legal system, there's different standards of evidence, preponderance of the evidence versus beyond a reasonable doubt or clear and convincing. Yeah. So there's a bit of some differences there.
Yeah. But the reason I bring up that I'm an engineer is just so I'm going to say something that is kind of unengineering, and so I'm proud of myself for this. So I'm going to pat myself on the back. So I think that what you just said about truth, and you started talking about the empirical versus non-empirical, finding. I'm actually going to make the argument that empiricism is strictly about epistemology. Truth is strictly about ontology. So I think that the empirical kind of is like a totally separate topic than truth. So what I mean by this is epistemology is distinct from ontology. That's essentially what I mean. So the way that you might believe something will either be empirical or non-empirical, but whether or not something is true, it's not like it's true empirically or it's not true empirically. It's just either true or it's not, right? Like and so I guess maybe we just want to quickly see if we can agree on the word truth so that we don't go Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson here. I just think that truth is, it's just like it matches reality, or like it comports with reality. That's all that I mean by true.
Yep. So, but with that said, truth itself, I'm kind of in the agreement that it does exist kind of independent of the subject. But with regards to finding it, epistemology is largely kind of how the human subject comes to gain the knowledge of what is considered true. So to me, that is not something that can really be discarded. So if we're going to be looking for what is considered true, we kind of have to look at both what is true and then kind of what is knowledge, or what are the means for one to arrive at this knowledge as well. So to me, the two largely, for the purposes of finding truth, the two really, they can and should be separate, but they really have to be considered within tandem with one another.
So yeah, I definitely agree that like epistemology and ontology should be like kept separate, because I mean they're like two different fields. But I suppose that I would reject that something can be true epistemologically. I would reject that something could be like empirically true but then false in another way.
Okay.
I would reject that.
Okay. So I guess with regards to true, and truth kind of exists largely, things can be true outside of kind of our own perception, but I guess kind of what I was getting at is that in terms of the subject, the human subject's perception of what is considered true, that is kind of when the epistemology comes in. So we really kind of have to gauge what is epistemologically true kind of in that or not epistemologically true, but we have to kind of gauge our own epistemology. So to make sure that we are arriving at it correctly, if that kind of makes sense.
So I actually do agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
But so I guess what I'm kind of driving towards is this. So I think that we were talking about dogma, and I think that you were trying to make this distinction, like dogma won't concern itself with the empirical. Dogma will only concern itself with like non-empirical things. Right? Okay. That's what you're driving at?
Yeah. So definitionally, if we're looking at, the Catholic Encyclopedia, dogma, it doesn't pertain to it's unconcerned with what's considered empirical. So kind of the scientific truths and kind of truth more or less relating to sense. It's unconcerned with science. It's concerned with what is considered revealed truth, or stuff which is necessarily, I guess, foundational, which cannot be proven necessarily by science. So I would kind of take the approach that empiricism itself as an epistemological criteria cannot be proven empirically. So kind of with that said, it largely is something that is foundationally basic, which we kind of have to have faith in order to use such a thing, in order to arrive at, kind of what's considered true. If that makes sense.
I'll admit I got lost for a second. And that might be because I latched on to something that you said, and then like the rest of it didn't register. So I can be dense. I can be very dense.
No, you're fine, man.
Bear with me.
You're fine.
So, I almost started getting like presuppositional vibes a little bit, but then you said something else, and so I think you may have not intended what I wound up hearing, because I just latched on to one word, and again, I can be very dense. So
regarding. No, I was just going to say, I don't consider myself a pre-sub.
I didn't think you did. Most Catholics aren't. So I certainly wasn't when I was a Catholic. But I guess let me ask a clarifying question that I think I know the answer to, but I just want to make sure that I'm not like putting words into your mouth or anything.
Sure.
So you mentioned that like dogma should not be empirical. And you said something along the lines of like dogma is foundational. Now that's the word foundation is like where I like my brain went, oh, precept, because I was like, oh, that's interesting. Are you making the argument that dogma are just the necessary presuppositions in order to actually like do logic or something? I don't think that's
no.
I didn't think so.
I'm
that's
not.
Why I wanted to.
I don't. See, kind of what I don't consider myself a precept, but with that said, I guess if I'm going to consider myself kind of an apologist, largely what I'll ask people how their epistemology lies. And then if there's a recursion there, I'm definitely going to call that out. But the presuppositional approach, from what I understand, is to be like, well, if that's the case, it's recursive, so therefore God. But I'm not quite that way. I'm like, well, you need to kind of definitely consider with this. And it doesn't need to be God or not, but this is something that you should definitely be kind of considering when you're kind of observing truth. And a lot of what I will like propose to people who are kind of in this situation, I'm just like, look, this kind of goes back to the entire faith and reason, which I think is the crux of our conversation. It's, if you want to have faith in empiricism, be like, look, I don't have evidence for empiricism as such, but I'm just going to have faith in it in order to, just kind of go about my life. And I'm going to use empirical means in order to derive the truth of something, but empiricism itself is just something I have faith in. Then I'm just like, okay, that's fine, just own it. But so I don't think that's necessarily a presuppositional. I'm not a Van Tillian. I'm not. There's actually a really interesting paper. I can send it to you if you want. It's called Presuppositionalism and Natural Theology by I think David Hayne, and he kind of goes into Van Til's kind of what he calls the interpretive schema, and kind of why basically presuppositionalism fails. And that's largely what I understand. It pertains to the Calvinist doctrine of total depravity, but that's kind of largely what I understand about it, and that's why I don't really consider myself pre-sub. So.
Yeah, and I certainly never did consider myself a presuppositionalist when I was a Catholic. Although now, and you can't see her, but I was just joined by my coworker. Her name's Molly. There she is. She's on the camera.
My coworkers are upstairs, so I have a Dalmatian and a golden retriever.
Oh, cute.
Sure.
But so I'd be interested in that paper for sure. I never considered myself a pre-sup, although I will I am the kind of guy who fully admits that everybody has a certain amount of presuppositions. Now, my stance is that I want to have as few presuppositions as I must in order to actually operate in this world. So my presuppositions are that the logical laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle work.
Yep.
I can't prove that to you, but they appear to always work. So I'm going to stick with them. And then I also presuppose that the outside world really does exist. I also can't prove that I'm not a brain in a vat. I haven't solved the problem of hard solipsism, but I'm just going to pretend like I have and not worry about it. But that's really it. Those are my only presuppositions as far as I can tell. And it almost appears to me like the Catholic Church necessitates that you take on additional presuppositions almost. Again, not calling the Catholic Church like a presupposition. I'm not calling Catholicism a presuppositionalist religion, but the Catholic Church, by having dogma, is kind of ordering its followers to presuppose certain facts. What do you think about that? You might want to push back.
Yeah. So I guess the main presuppositional, well, I don't know, I wouldn't even really call it a presupposition, but, you know, if what the Catholic Church teaches is true, then by definition, the dogmas that it would teach would be true, which therefore those dogmas would be considered truth. So really, if we're looking at tautology,
if it's true, then it's true.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that is definitely true. But so that would definitely, I guess, what would be required there would be to look into the, you know, kind of the claims of the Catholic Church as the, you know, the church founded by Jesus Christ and all of that jazz. So, and then from there, the dogmas would kind of fall from there. So I wouldn't really. The presuppositions. Let me just kind of think.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, actually, maybe presupposition is not the right word, and maybe the right word is just dogma, because you're not necessarily relying on dogma to like arrive anywhere else. It's like the dogma is the destination, and the church is just kind of telling you like, hey, you gotta believe it. Done.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely kind of what the dogma would be considered. I guess, so your large kind of issue is that by considering these dogmas without any additional inquiry, it's considered anti-intellectual, and this is something that should be avoided.
Yes, and so, I'll go further to kind of like make it like I want to be like even-handed. I would call someone who accepted the theory of gravity as dogma anti-intellectual as well. Even though I think that there's really good reasons to accept the theory of gravity. I think there's excellent reasons. I accept the theory of gravity.
Would agree, yes.
But if one day science was somehow able to disprove gravity, I would drop my belief in the theory of gravity. Catholics cannot say the same thing.
Would you drop your belief in the theories of science? Because
what do you mean the theories of science?
Like, well, not the theories of science, but if science... I feel like a lot of like the more secular folks, they kind of have this, you know, kind of, it's almost kind of considered a faith in science. So, and as we know, there's large scientism. So there's, I'm not saying science lies, but I'm saying, you know, it's like that old saying, like statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics more or less.
Yeah.
So I'm, you know, science can be like bought off. I don't know. Are you aware of like Feyerabend?
No, what's that?
Like Paul Feyerabend. So essentially, I haven't looked into him for a while. I actually wasn't intending to bring him up today. But, you know, there was Karl Popper, who was largely a logical positivist. And then Feyerabend, he was considered, I'd have to read back into him, but he was what's considered kind of a epistemological anarchist. And so he actually proposed, and I need to read back up on this, what is considered the so separation of church and state, you're aware of, separation of science and state. And so there's been like certain, you know, scientific studies that have been, you know, funded in such a way as to derive particular results. Like I'm thinking of when Coca-Cola founded the sugar study back in the day, like in order to say, oh, sugar is actually not bad, actually. So it's just kind of stuff like that. And so I think that's largely kind of it was a little bit more, he was more a philosopher of science, but I'd say probably maybe look in him. I think he was definitely opposed to Karl Popper, if I remember right. So I forgot where I was kind of going with that.
Well, so I'll just kind of riff off of that for a second. The reason I listed my bias, right, as an engineer, like I love the empirical,
Mm-hmm.
is specifically because someone like me is probably the kind of person who can fall prey to scientism. I
Mm-hmm.
do my absolute best not to. And in fact, I'm actually highly skeptical of like a lot of the soft science fields. So in particular, I'm a chemical engineer. So
Okay.
literally my entire field of study is chemistry, physics, and math,
Yep.
all very hard sciences. There's no like it's not like sociology
Oh yeah,
where
where it's like a little squishier and you can kind of read your own biases a
I
little bit
am
more.
highly skeptical of journal articles that come out of like Psychology Today that talk about
Yeah.
like I'm highly skeptical of a
Yeah.
lot of stuff like that. So um all that to say, I don't think that I fall prey to scientism, but I feel like I'm the kind of person who would. So I'm actively
Mhm.
trying to fight against like my
Yeah.
empirical
Well,
bias, kind of. You know what I mean?
yeah. Props to you, man. That's awesome. But no, I kind of see what you're saying. Kind of the sociology being considered kind of squishier, and then sociologists kind of reading their own biases back into the science as well.
Yes,
So,
yes, that's exactly what I mean.
yep.
Especially so. I consider myself fairly politically like middle of the road. Like I'm not huge into politics at all, but I
Gotcha.
do worry about the effect of the current political climate upon sciences, particularly the soft sciences like sociology and stuff like that. I
Hmm.
worry about that a lot. I think that politics is influencing science.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you there, and I think I would recommend maybe looking into Fire Urban. I should probably relook into him as well. It's been a long time since I looked into
Mhm.
his stuff, but he might be he's just a good philosopher of science, I think, to be aware of. He wasn't super mainstream, but he's I think he's pretty good.
Yeah.
But no, I would agree with you. I think there's definitely, and to me, I don't think sociology is necessarily something that can be, disregarded or anything like that. I think there are times where it definitely has like interesting things to say. I'm thinking of like the
Yeah, yeah,
Max
of course.
papers and stuff like that.
I'm not
So
trying to throw out the whole like
maybe with the
field or
problem,
anything, but
for sure.
um but yeah, so let me bring it back to dogmatism and
Can I
so
can I can I just propose a question real quick?
take it away.
So back to the concept of like faith and reason. Would you consider yourself? I'm assuming back in your Catholic days you'd say no, but are you aware of the concept of fideism? And back when you were a Catholic, I would assume you weren't one because that's something that is definitely kind of frowned upon. Do you consider yourself kind of a fideist now?
I'm so sorry. Remind me what fideism is.
Judaism is so it's largely that faith and reason are in opposition to one another. So largely, that's kind of the more main, I guess, pop version of it. So it's that faith and reason are the opposites of one another. It was largely and kind of pertains to faith as a kind of superior to reason. So you think Martin Luther, I think, was one of the earlier fideists. So it's like if faith is opposed to reason, then faith should, supersede it. And you can kind of see that among a certain evangelical crowd today.
Yeah.
And then there's also largely, I would say, the more secular fideists that kind of decry faith as such, be like, nope, you can only use empiricism, you can only use, you know, rationalism more or less. So I don't consider myself a fideist at all. So that is a position of the church, and that I think epistemologically is the most reasonable position. My position is that faith and reason work with one another and they're not opposites. And I think you would probably agree with that.
So when I was a Catholic, I was definitely not a fideist. Full
Okay.
disclosure, I did grow up young Earth creationist. So
Oh, you did.
I
Okay.
did. I grew up young
I
Earth
did
creationist.
not. So
Um,
I'm
I
still.
I was a
So.
young Earth creationist until high school. And then in high school, like I was hit with like the overwhelming evidence for an old Earth, and a priest who was not FSSP but was just a Latin, like a traditional Latin Mass friendly priest, came
Yep.
to our church, and he was like, guys, it's actually okay to believe in evolution. Like
Yeah.
the church says it's okay. Like you're allowed to. And so
Hmm.
slowly, like from ages like 14 to 17 over those 3 years, I went from just like a strict young Earth creationist to a no, the world is definitely like
Hmm.
more than 6,000 years old. So when I was young, I may have been a fideist, but I wouldn't have had the language to describe it as such.
Sure.
But by the time that I was like maturer in my Catholic faith, I was definitely not a fideist. I was definitely like a Like, science, woohoo, we love science. We're the Catholic Church and we love science.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was definitely not. And then today, I'm not going to call. So this is probably a whole other can of worms, but I actually don't think that faith is a reliable pathway to truth.
Okay.
So we don't have to go there if you don't want to. But
so yeah, so kind of how I would say it is that if you're going to have faith, I know you kind of work against the kind of your own presuppositions, but I think there are things which are necessarily, not to get, presupp adjacent or anything, but there are things that are necessarily foundational, which we have to hold in order for their, in order for us to kind of make sense of the world. So it's not necessarily a coherentist type thing, but we have to have faith in something like empiricism. We have to have faith that our senses are actually telling us what it is that we are perceiving. We have to have faith in, I don't know, I feel like there's a whole bunch of things. Well, faith is ultimately trust. And I feel like there's, I don't know, we can kind of posit faith alongside inductive reasoning as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I have faith that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. So.
Right. So I'm going to draw a couple delineations and then see if I can't kind of collapse our current difference into like oh no, we disagree, but we were using the same words to kind of mean different things. I think we might be closer than we think we are. So let's see. Sure. Let's find out. So when I say faith, I normally take the definition from Ephesians or whatever. Like faith is the hope for things not seen. Mm-hmm. Or faith is the evidence for things not seen and the hope for the...
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Hebrews 11:1.
Hebrews. Thank you. Yes.
Hold on, let me
That's generally the evidence for things that we don't have evidence for. That's kind of how I...
substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Generally, this is from an LDS source. I just went to Google.
Grab the Douay Rheims because that was the only Bible that I read growing up.
And yes, definitely.
Radtrad, Douay Rheims only.
Yeah, Douay Rheims Chad. I have a Douay Rheims. Actually, I don't read it too much. I do the New American Standard.
I have a New American on my bookshelf. You can see my bookshelf, but the audience cannot. Well, you can see the end of it.
I can see your bookshelf.
I've got a Douay Rheims. I've got a New American over there.
So
it's easier to read.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say to the Hebrews definition of faith is generally kind of what I hold faith is to be trust. So that's kind of the most basic definition that I have. And I don't see those two as necessarily being in conflict with one another. Faith is trust, or faith as, kind of the Hebrews definition of faith. So I don't see those necessarily in conflict with one another.
Well, I'm gonna need like a little bit of help here, only because I do see a pretty big difference between just the word trust and then the definition of faith as given in Hebrews.
Okay.
So I guess my question for you is, let me explain what I mean and then ask you what you mean. To me, trust might mean something like, I believe it without full 100% knowledge. So if you trust that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, it's because you have a lot of evidence. You have a lifetime of the sun rising every day. Mm-hmm. That to me is not the same thing as the evidence for the things not seen. Evidence for things not seen to me would be something like, I have faith that God exists because even though I can't prove him empirically, I have a feeling like I'm moved by the Holy Spirit, and that is my evidence. Like the faith is the evidence for God who is not seen, but the faith in my heart is the evidence that I need to believe that God is there. So faith is what lets you trust, is kind of how I see it. But if you're kind of collapsing the difference between faith and trust, or no, let me not put any words in your mouth. I see the two as separate. How do you see the two?
I guess, I kind of conflate faith and trust, and I don't see really a conflict with this between that and Hebrews. So, I mean, within this particular instance of the sun rising tomorrow, I actually don't have, I guess, prior instances of the sun rising that would definitely be, epistemic. That'd be evidence. That'd be epistemic warrant that the faith that I would have, believe that the sun would rise tomorrow. But with that said, that's not like super hardline kind of evidence or anything like that. So in that particular instance of the sun rising tomorrow, that in my mind would be an instance of faith because I'm just trusting it kind of based on what's prior. And so to me, that is largely how faith should operate. It shouldn't be blind. It should be, kind of governed by other instances of other things as well. So, in this instance, the faith that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, it's governed by previous instances of the sun actually rising. So that's largely kind of how I would see faith. It should be kind of faith and reason, in my view, inform one another. Have you read John Paul II's encyclical Fides et Ratio?
Yes.
Okay, you have. Perfect. I was actually just reviewing that prior to our chat. So. So that I think it gives a very pretty solid view of kind of the relationship between faith and reason. So I don't know if it'd be worthwhile. I actually have it pulled up. I don't know if it'd be worthwhile for us to maybe like kind of go through particular parts of it so we can maybe kind of see where it is we disagree. I have quite a few things kind of pulled up here. So Let me see if I can't share my screen with you.
And I'm going to go ahead and switch the screen over to just you. So then when you share your screen, I should just be seeing your screen. I'll let you know if that's not what I see.
Perfect. So let's just do my entire screen. So, okay, there we go. Cool. So can you see my screen, Kevin?
It's loading.
Okay.
Oh, I actually see both of us on. Oh no, now I just see the screen.
Okay, so now it's like recursive and stuff like that. Okay, so Fides et Ratio. I also have the definition of kind of dogma because this is kind of the crux of where our original disagreement lies. Yeah. So I thought maybe it might be worthwhile if we kind of comb through this together as well. But I'm just I was largely just kind of skimming it. Faith and reason are two things on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human desire a desire to know the truth and a word to know himself, that by knowing and loving God, men and women may come to the fullness of truth about themselves. So it says right here, John Paul II is kind of saying, so they largely work together in kind of coming to the truth and they're not kind of opposite. So this to me kind of just sets the tone of it.
I will disagree right off the bat.
Okay.
Only because I don't think that faith is actually a reliable pathway to truth. And the reason that I say that is because Catholics have faith that God is triune. Muslims have faith that God is not triune, that he's monotheistic only. Well, the Catholics are monotheistic, but you get my idea.
Yeah, so three persons within the Trinity and stuff like that.
Right.
So
and Muslims have faith that that's not the case. And it doesn't appear to be the case that we can just take two people and say who has the stronger faith, and then whoever has the stronger faith is actually correct. That doesn't. Yeah, well, that doesn't kind of appear to be it doesn't appear to be a reliable way to arrive at true beliefs.
Well, I mean, in that instance, you're defining faith in terms of an emotion almost. It's kind of. Are you aware of kind of immanentism?
No.
Largely, I believe it's considered a heresy. Immanentism is basically kind of, if I recall, there's actually a pretty good article I read about it a while ago. I'd have to review it, but it's largely kind of like allowing, your faith and religion and stuff like that to be governed solely by your own emotional state. So, and that is considered a heresy. And if I remember right, there's a pretty good article on it. I can send that to you as well. But that's largely kind of what immanentism is.
I don't think that Muslims, though, are arriving at their belief that God is not triune using only emotions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they are also...
They would still say that they have faith in God not being triune. So that's what
so they're using... Yeah, so they kind of... Islam is also a natural theology religion as well. And so... I've heard certain Islamic apologists kind of say that Islam is truly the only natural theology religion available to us because everything that it uses is used to kind of arrive to God. I have my differences with that. But so I guess it kind of goes back to the entire faith and reason thing that we were kind of talking about previously is that, faith ultimately as trust or as things unseen. I guess in my reason, I don't see how we can reason ourselves into absolutely everything that we have. And I think that, faith working in tandem with reason is probably the most complete epistemology that we can have.
So yeah, I mean, you can imagine that I still disagree because I don't think that faith is actually a reliable pathway to truth.
Okay. So, I mean... So it's like faith in empiricism, faith in, more or less kind of logic, faith in, kind of your own mind in order to kind of source particular things out, faith in kind of mathematics. So I don't see kind of what you would call these things if not just faith. Kind of see what I'm saying?
I presuppose the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle.
Mm-hmm.
I do, like I fully admit that.
Yep.
But
I guess why would that not be faith in my instance?
Because I presuppose them out of necessity just to operate in the world.
Okay.
So I'm going to draw a difference between a presupposition and faith. To me, you're having faith in something that you don't actually need in order to operate in the world. So like that's why we draw a difference between like presuppositional Protestants and like non-presuppositional Christians. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like we draw like we don't just say that they all have faith and that's it. No, we draw a difference between the precepts and the non-precepts.
Yeah, well, we do when they're using it as an argument for God, because the precept people, what they'll do is they'll say this, be like, hey, in order to this, you need to kind of presuppose God in order to make sense of the entire universe. So
I mean, it's more than that, right? They say that you need to presuppose God even for logic to work. So like they would look at me presupposing the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, and they'd be like, well, you need to presuppose God to even be able to presuppose the laws.
And see, that's where I kind of differ from them. I'm not saying, look, you need to kind of presuppose God in order for the laws of logic to work. What I'm saying is that, hey, listen, you can't prove the laws of logic kind of using the laws of logic in and of itself. So in that sense, yes, you are presupposing it, but you're presupposing it not on something based on reason. You're presupposing it based on, something outside of reason or faith. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, faith and reason necessarily need to work together with each other. And it's not like I think faith working with reason, it's, reason by itself is incomplete. And so for everything outside of reason, that is where faith kind of comes in.
So I might agree with a statement that goes like this: reason and certain presuppositions are how people arrive at truth. But I would not agree that reason and faith is how people arrive at. So,
but what are these presuppositions if not faith? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I'm going to consider a presupposition something that I need in order to operate in the world, something that I would drop if I could be done. Like if I didn't have to assume it to be true, I wouldn't. But faith, you don't need the same things that you have faith in. You don't need those in order to actually operate in the world. So like you might have faith that certain dogmas are true, like the Assumption of Mary. But the Assumption of Mary is not something that like you require and able to use the law of non-contradiction. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. I think you're delegating faith to a specifically an explicit religious context where I'm not necessarily doing that. So with a presupposition, necessarily, you're not arriving to your presuppositions using reason. So I don't really, I understand you said you would drop them if given the opportunity, if you had the capabilities of doing that. But with that said, you don't necessarily have that ability. So I guess is it more or less kind of faith is something that is explicitly adopted and explicitly acknowledged to be adopted, and then presuppositions are not? Is that kind of more your position?
No, so I think my position, and by the way, you can go ahead and hit the stop presenting button, I think, and then you'll pop up on the screen.
Right. Sorry.
There you go. No, we look good now.
Yep.
So I think the way that I would differentiate like faith and presupposition is that presuppositions are things that you believe because you must in order to operate in the world, while faith are things that you believe that you don't necessarily, you mustn't believe them, but you do anyway.
So faith is something more or less chosen. Presuppositions are not chosen.
Yeah, I think I'm okay. Well, you still choose your presuppositions, but you choose them because you don't want to be a solipsist. So,
sure. Yep.
Presuppositions are beliefs that you choose to believe in order to avoid hard solipsism. I'm good with that. Good with that.
Okay, so more or less faith is, put it this way, somewhat more voluntary versus, presuppositionalism is something which you recognize as involuntary. Like, look, I need to act this way in order to kind of act within the world.
Yeah.
So I guess, I don't know, where does the voluntarism kind of arise in any definite? Because you look at kind of the base word in terms of epistemology. You take a look at the word epistemology, and one of the base words in the word etymologically, is pistis, which is the Greek word for faith, which is largely contingent on the word trust. So I guess where does, wanting to believe and, not wanting to believe, I guess I don't make that distinction with regards to faith. I think if you want to trust somebody or you will to trust somebody or you don't will to trust somebody, it's largely kind of irrelevant. So I don't think faith is necessarily something. Is faith something of the will, or is it solely something of the intellect?
That's I'm not sure what the difference would be.
So a will and an intellect. So an intellect is largely something of the mind. So the will is something that you kind of desire. The intellect is something of the rational faculty of the mind, if that kind of makes sense.
Again, I'm not really sure what the difference would be, because you can like will to have faith in something, as far as I can tell anyway. Like I assume that you have faith in the bodily assumption of Mary into heaven, right? Because that's a dogma.
Yeah, I do.
So, but you mustn't have faith in the bodily assumption of Mary into heaven in order to, operate on a daily basis. To cross the street, you don't need, you must.
So is it largely a function of utility for you? So it's like faith is something you don't see as necessary. Okay, for sure. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how I'll distill the difference between like a precept and like having faith in something is precepts are strictly utilitarian. And I would, to tie it back into intellectualism and what is anti-intellectual, I think that it's anti-intellectual to have more presuppositions than you absolutely must.
Okay.
And I think that dogma is essentially additional presuppositions. Now, I know it's not really additional presuppositions. It's different, but dogmas functionally behave the same way as presuppositions in as much as you must believe them. But dogmas you only must believe because the church tells you to. Presuppositions like the laws of logic, you must believe not because the church tells you to, but because you must in order to operate in the world.
I guess I don't really make a distinction regarding kind of what one deems to be the utility of them. So, I mean, you can say presuppositions are useful, and then, what you determine to be faith is not useful. I guess I don't really make the distinction between the two in terms of how they're useful to me. I make
the distinction. Like I'm presenting a distinction between them, right?
Yep. And I get that. Your distinction is that presuppositions are what is deemed useful for you in order to continue to operate in the world.
Well, not just for me, right? They're useful for nobody can choose to ignore the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, and then still operate in the world.
But you're speaking specifically from you as the subject, as the speaker, as the person who kind of perceives these things and kind of uses them within the world. Does that kind of make sense? So, I mean, you can apply it to like Joe, Bob, Harry down the street, but kind of your distinction that you're making is that the presuppositions, those are more or less what has utility for you and for anybody else or whoever, your grandma, whoever. And then faith is something that does not have any utility for anybody. So it's more or less, it largely kind of comes down to what's considered useful.
That's harsher language than I would use. I wouldn't want to say that faith is not, it has no utility for anybody. Faith has utility for some people in the sense that like it helps people like afterlife management. You ever hear of that? I think that faith has utility. I just don't think that it's necessary in order to go about living your life. So I don't necessarily disagree with your characterization. It's just a little harsher language than I would have used.
Yeah, I didn't intend to come up with that.
No, and you're describing your own position too. So I think that you can get away with using harsher language than I want to. I don't want to come across like a jerk to anybody.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Good. But I guess for me, so would that be an accurate characterization? Maybe it was too harsh. But presuppositions are what is used. They're what necessarily must be assumed in order to go about your daily life, versus faith is something which doesn't really have as much utility to go about your daily life. Precisely. So you don't need to assume the assumption in order to cross the street, but you do need to assume that what you're perceiving is real for you to cross the street.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a fair characterization. I guess I don't think of it in terms of the utility to the particular subject. I think of it in terms of kind of the methodology of how the mechanism actually works. So, I mean, if you're presupposing, how does a presupposition work? It's something that is more or less kind of foundational in your mind, which you yourself cannot arrive to within that regard. And I guess I don't see a distinction between that and faith in that way. I guess the utility to the subject actually holding, the dogma, the presupposition, the faith in the first place, I don't really see that as relevant. I mean, you can see it as useful to go about your daily life or not. It's really irrelevant. You're arriving at it the same way. And in that regard, that is still the same thing as faith to me.
So the relevance would be what's anti-intellectual and what's not. So
Okay.
my argument is that it's hostile to the intellect to make more presuppositions than you absolutely must.
Okay.
So I'm not going to call somebody anti-intellectual for assuming that the laws of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle work. But I am going to call somebody anti-intellectual if they assume the law of gravity and they're unwilling to change their mind about it, even if new evidence comes out.
Okay.
Likewise, I'm going to call somebody anti-intellectual if they assume that Mary was assumed body and soul into heaven, regardless of what. And I kind of picked on that one in particular because theoretically, it's possible that we find the body of Mary, the mother of God, one day. It's not going to happen. But it's possible. But according to current Catholic teaching, you would not be allowed to believe that that's her body, even if we could prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was her body, because you are bound to believe by the Catholic Church that you must believe that her body is in heaven. And so if we found her body on earth, you would have to say, I don't believe that, even if the scientific evidence was overwhelming. And so that's why I call it anti-intellectual.
Okay. I mean, I think this kind of goes back to what is considered, it might be a good segue into kind of going into what's considered intellectual or anti-intellectual now. So, I mean, what is, you were kind of, I've seen you in kind of multiple areas now where you kind of like lambast what is seen as like intellectual or anti-intellectual. So maybe we can kind of expound upon that. So it might, I don't think our conversation about faith necessarily is finished. It might require a little bit of flushing out down the line, but I think this might be a decent.
We could spend like 7 hours talking about it and we still wouldn't be finished. So
yeah, I would agree with that. But maybe you can kind of just give a little bit of a rundown on kind of what you consider to be intellectual or anti-intellectual.
So I'm not concerned with intellectualism, the movement in like the 19th century England. Like that's not what I'm talking about.
That's not what you're talking about?
Yeah. What I am talking about is so when I call something, really intellectualism doesn't even really have to come into the conversation here. What I mean by anti-intellectual is just something that is hostile to the use of the intellect. And I think it's hostile to the use of the intellect to arrive at a conclusion even in light of all of the evidence being contrary. And so since the Catholic Church commands that you would have to deny all the evidence to the contrary, I'm calling that anti-intellectual just because it's hostile to the intellect. That's essentially all that I mean.
Okay, so that's more or less kind of what you mean. So it's basically like the intellect is what should be kind of regarded as kind of privileged to all other mechanisms, if they exist, to coming towards truth. Largely because epistemology, that's largely kind of how we gain knowledge of the world, is through kind of our knowledge and through the intellect. So I guess maybe this might be a decent segue to kind of take a look at kind of the Catholic Encyclopedia, and we can kind of extrapolate kind of what exactly is kind of what the issue is. Because in your original video, it was kind of that one sentence that you kind of were kind of poking at a little bit. And then I provided context. So this might be a good discussion to kind of wrap it back around to what the original thing was. So does that sound like a plan to you? Okay. Sweet. No, that sounds good to me, man. So I'll present my entire testing. Can you hear me?
I can hear. Oh, we're back. I think I accidentally unplugged my microphone for a second. I had to put the cord back in real quick. We're good. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine, man. You're fine. So, okay. I think you can see my screen probably now.
Yeah.
So this isn't exactly what you linked to, but I think it's fairly similar. I think it actually has very, very the same passages, if I recall. So it's basically the New Advent article having to do with dogma. So the word dogma opinion which seems true to a person. And then you and say, yeah, we kind of talked about this already.
Ephesians 2:15. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So understood to be a truth that pertaining to faith or morals revealed by God, transmitted from the apostles down through the church, all that jazz. So you were talking specifically in terms of dogma and science, if I recall. So, and let me try to pinpoint the sentence that you talked about in your short here. Puts no further.
I think it was under number 2. If it's like literally a copy paste, scroll down. There you go. Number 2.
Here we go. Catholic dogma and
ecclesiastical
limit intellectual activity only so far as may be necessary for safeguarding the truths of revelation. So this is kind of your kind of the one that you originally had an issue with. This is the sentence, right?
Yeah. So just to distill my short into like a single sentence, it would be something like limiting intellectual activity to safeguard quote truths of revelation is anti-intellectual. That's kind of like the one sentence summary of the short that I made.
Okay, and I know that there was so I'm sure you're well familiar with Catholicism. You're probably well aware of the index and stuff like that. How there was a list of banned books that was essentially these were prohibited unless you had like some sort of approval from your local bishop or something along those lines. Are you I'm assuming you're aware of the index?
Yep, but the index was done away with in what, 1962?
Yes, that is correct. So it was done away with, but for a long time, that's kind of what was considered. So
now, believe it or not, in trad communities, they still like refer to the index. And
which communities are?
In traditionalist communities, like the one that I grew up in, we still refer to the index. And if you actually read the language from, was it Vatican II where they did away with the index?
Around then, yeah.
Okay. If you refer to the language, it actually says like, hey, we're getting rid of the index officially, but we still recommend that you don't. Yeah.
It says that basically there's too many books that we can put on the index at this point, so one should exercise prudence when reading any other texts.
Yes.
More or less.
Yeah.
So the way that I would kind of describe it is we kind of go back to largely what is the purpose of the Catholic Church? So it's to get people in, to get kind of souls into heaven and to limit the amount of souls that go into hell as much as possible. So with that, given in the light of that, the index almost in a sense starts to make sense if you kind of see it that way. I mean, they're not trying to kind of, I don't know, stifle inquiry just because they want to stifle inquiry for that sake. Kind of the way that they see it.
And that's why the index actually didn't appear in my little short at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually not my contention here.
Yep.
I disagree with it. I don't think that there should be an index, and I think that it's like I think it's a bad idea, but I wasn't necessarily calling it anti-intellectual because I don't think that the church was actually saying never read these. The church was saying if you're too stupid, don't read these. You need to be smart like me before you're allowed to read them.
Well, I mean, not even that. It's like saying, hey, if you're going to read these, just be cognizant, I guess. So, I mean, they would probably put that in far stronger language back in the day. But, I mean, if you look at kind of the, I guess, mission of the Catholic Church to get people to heaven, that, I mean, within light of that, it may seem harsh, but I do think it does make sense. And I think, with regards to the index and kind of the reason that it existed, you can take a similar approach to this sentence right here. So, Catholic dogma and ecclesiastical authority limit intellectual activity only so far as may be necessary for safeguarding the truths of revelation. So if we look at it in terms of the light of getting people into heaven, I mean, that's largely kind of how I would interpret this. I'm like, hey, like saying, hey, look, like if you're intellectual, because you can intellectualize yourself into, basically into nothingness, more or less. Kind of like, I have you read many of the Pomo guys, like the French postmodernists, like your Adornos and like Foucault's and stuff like that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I'm assuming, are you like familiar kind of with who they are?
Not necessarily. I don't think so.
Okay. So essentially, do you know kind of what postmodernism is?
I mean, more or less. Like,
okay, so essentially, the large kind of thing with postmodernism, it's the rejection of meta-narrative. So modernism, you can think of like pre-modernism was the one meta-narrative. So I guess in the case of, the Occident or Western Christianity, or what basically the Western world was Christianity. And then modernism arose, which then introduced additional meta-narratives that one can kind of live their life by, such as Marxism or feminism or or progressivism, like progress is continually happening, or you can continue to be Christianity. So a lot of kind of what the postmodern project was kind of the deconstruction of these meta narratives, and it did so kind of by a variety of ways. So it was kind of the deconstruction of these meta narratives. So it can deconstruct like Marxism, it can deconstruct feminism, it can deconstruct kind of Christianity as well, and so it's doing this all via the intellect and kind of reduces things in terms of power. I'm not like an expert on the pomos. There's some people kind of within the trad that are aware of guys like Foucault and Derrida that are very, very hostile to them. That's not kind of where I'm coming from. I think they have a lot of very interesting things to say. But I think that's largely kind of what this is saying here. It's like, look, you can think yourself into a black hole. I mean, the limit of the intellect can largely turn into relativism if you kind of think about it, if you take it to its logical end. Are you aware of...
Sorry, real quick. Do you mind if I jump in?
Yeah, I didn't mean to like ramble. So go on, take your time. So, I don't know if I gave a great explanation of it, but
no, yeah, I think this was useful. And if you go ahead and hit stop presenting, then I can put the screen back on me, and you said we're big again. All right, now it's just you. Now it's on both of us. Okay, so perfect. The line that we highlighted and really spent the most time on was the church does limit intellectual activity in as much as just to safeguard the truths of divine revelation, or the truths of divine revelation, or whatever it says.
Yep.
And so you made the analogy to like, hey, we're doing this because we want to maximize the number of souls in heaven and minimize the number of souls in hell.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive me if this comes across like aggressive or something. I certainly don't mean it as aggressive, but It almost sounds like, no, I could say this non-aggressively. I just thought about something much better. It almost sounds like we're agreeing. Like, yeah, this is anti-intellectual, but the church has a good reason for being anti-intellectual. They want to save souls.
In a way. So I guess I'm looking at it in terms of what are the limits of kind of intellectualism. So there's a guy on YouTube. He's kind of like an orthodox guy, but he's like not explicitly religious. So he kind of marries like a lot of like Christian theology with like...
Talking about like Pajot or someone?
Who is it?
Are you talking about like Pajot?
No, not Pajot. Pajot, he's cool or whatever, but I'm talking of Telos Bound. Do you know who he is?
That sounds like the word teleology. And like telos is Greek.
So I know you rejected, final causes or whatever.
I do.
But there's a guy, I think he's at least worth like...
I'll check him out. Yeah, no, I'll subscribe.
Check him out. Check him out, man. I think he's very, very sharp. Orthodox guy. But where was I going with this? He was marrying, he's coming at it with an Orthodox perspective, obviously, but he also was heavily influenced by like Zizek, Hegel, Heidegger. He actually had a pretty good video on Florensky the other day, basically, who was an Orthodox guy, but he was kind of talking in terms of kind of skepticism. And it was a fairly recent video, but it was kind of the limit of skepticism, how it turns into I affirm, I do not affirm, I affirm, I do not affirm. So it's kind of a perpetual pendulum, so to speak. And so within this, I guess within the purposes of this conversation, I mean, if you kind of take skepticism to its rational limits, you disaffirm kind of everything except for the statement, I don't affirm. That is something that you do affirm. And so it's a perpetual pendulum between I affirm, I do not affirm, I affirm, I do not affirm. And so that kind of gets you back into a, I don't know, there's something, it's recursive, if that kind of makes sense.
So
let me know if I lost you.
No. So I almost just think that this is like a different issue entirely. It's almost saying I want to make sure that I'm not putting words into your mouth. So I'm going to say something that I think that you were saying, but then I'm going to ask you to correct me.
Yep.
So it almost sounds like you're saying intellectualism is dangerous for some people. So we need to limit intellectualism in order to stop them from falling into like nihilism almost.
What I'm saying is that if intellectualism left alone, left kind of within its own structures without kind of, some sort of faith or some presupposition, whatever you want to call it, to guide it, in that case, then rationalism or intellectualism can largely just kind of eat itself in a way. So, I mean, that's largely kind of what it can turn largely into relativism. You kind of see what I'm saying?
I do, but this is what I'm calling anti-intellectualism.
Okay.
Like it almost sounds like you agree with me. Like
you would call relativism
no,
anti-intellectual.
I would call limiting intellectual activity anti-intellectualism. And it almost sounds to me like you're saying, well, I think limiting intellectual activity is a good thing. And then if that's the case, we don't necessarily disagree that the church is being anti-intellectual. It's just that I think that it's overall not a good thing to be anti-intellectual. And you might be like, well, no, anti-intellectualism is actually a tool that the church uses to get more souls into heaven. Like that's kind of where I see things kind of like
I'm not even necessarily, I mean, at this point, I'm not even necessarily thinking in terms of getting souls into heaven. My purpose with this is if you kind of leaving rationalism largely by itself, I don't see how it does not turn into basically nihilism or relativism or something which, because you can kind of rationalize yourself into a black hole, basically. And so,
but so what if it does? It would still be anti-intellectual to. So let's say that.
So at that point, I mean, if you rationalize yourself into nothingness, then I mean, then what is the point of kind of, you know, privileging the intellect if it's just going to, you know, accelerate you into death?
Well, that's precisely why I'm. So it sounds to me like you're just making the argument that anti-intellectualism is actually a good thing, because the intellect is dangerous and you might wind up a nihilist. And then,
well, that's not really the thing either, because I want to use the intellect as far as it can possibly go, but I also use it.
No, you don't. Right? You don't want to, because as far as it can possibly go is nihilism, right? I mean, that's not my belief, but.
Well, okay, so let me finish. I want to use it as far as it can possibly go in the light of, you know, reason, or in the light of, you know, kind of the faith given by God. Because like I said, if reason is left kind of unencumbered, like with nothing else, if you're just kind of pure rationality, you do reason yourself into relativism. You do reason yourself into nihilism. And I think this is largely kind of what Nietzsche did back in the early part of the 20th century. And so he kind of saw the ramifications of his atheism, and he used it to deconstruct the value systems. And he saw nihilism originally as an intermediary state that was supposed to be, you know, kind of intermediary before man could construct his own values. So he was trying to find a way to construct his own values, and then he couldn't do it. So this is kind of the limit of what the rationalism is kind of doing. So my take is that intellectualism, take it as far as you possibly can in terms of, if we define intellectualism as using your intellect, by all means use it as much as you possibly can. With that said, use it alongside faith. So that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm not saying just find its place and then stop. I'm saying use it as far as you possibly can in the light of, you know, kind of the presuppositions that you're using.
It sounds to me like you're saying use it as far as you can with the limits that the church has put on it. And that's precise. The limits that the church puts on it is precisely what I'm calling anti-intellectualism. So it almost sounds to me like we might be agreeing, but it's just that, like, because the word anti-intellectual has this negative connotation to it, which it does, hands up. It has a negative connotation to it. But maybe your argument here isn't that, Kevin, I disagree with you that the church is anti-intellectual. Maybe your argument is like, no, intellectualism left unchecked is dangerous. The church is doing a good thing. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
I previously defined intellectualism as just kind of using the intellect. Did I define it that way previously?
I'm fine with that. And then I'll just define anti-intellectualism as like behavior that is contrary to using your intellect.
Okay. I would maybe even cut out the behavioral part. I would say anti-intellectualism is merely, you know, against the use of intellect.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay. So I'm not against the use of intellect.
Didn't you just say that you were, because intellectualism left unchecked brings you to nihilism? Which, by the way, I disagree with, but I'm willing to just like kind of let that go for the sake of.
Yep. So so if we define anti-intellectualism as against the use of the intellect, I am not against the use of the intellect, ergo I'm not an anti-intellectual, and as is the Catholic Church. So that is largely kind of how I would say it. So what I would say is that, you know, what I'm saying is that reason left, you know, without the light of any faith or anything like that, it reasons itself into moral nihilism and moral relativism, because there's ultimately something upon which you cannot, you don't reason yourself kind of into. And so there's something in there that, like I said, and you've admitted it, is the presuppositions and kind of the assumptions that you've had previously. if reason's left unchecked, you kind of more or less kind of reason yourself into moral relativism and nihilism. So is that, maybe I didn't explain myself well, but.
So that's precisely what I call anti-intellectualism. So
Okay.
let me see if I can like maybe repeat what you've said in such a good way, because I think I understand what you're saying. So let me see if I can repeat it to you in a way that you approve of it. That way I make sure that because maybe I don't understand what you're saying. And so this is like a good way for me to see if I do understand what you're saying. So what you're saying is pure intellectualism left to run amok will inevitably, maybe not even necessarily inevitably, but will at least sometimes result in nihilism. We need to avoid nihilism. So the church has put a framework in place that just kind of adds a backstop so that you can use your intellect up until you hit the backstop, but then the backstop is just preventing you from getting to nihilism. So like, boom, backstop, you can use your intellect all the way up until here, and then you're done. No more.
I see. That's also kind of, I don't know. I don't quite kind of agree with that. The issue is that when you hit that backstop and, you keep going, and you're like, oh, I'm deconstructing the church. Ultimately, I mean, you take that backdrop to its ultimate, like, logical conclusion. And then that I would argue is nihilism and moral relativism. So, I mean, you can say, yeah, there's this explicit backdrop, which is the authority of the church. But I mean, what about the other backdrops back here, which can be like, your presuppositions and stuff like that. So my argument to that is, yes, there are additional backdrops, and there are additional backdrops, which if you are considering, if you're, a pure rationalist, you're going to borrow those ones down as well. So that is why ultimately you need something like a presupposition or faith, so you don't kind of batter those ones down as well. Does that kind of clarify a little bit more? So I think there's a whole bunch. The church is not against the use of intellect at all. So we on the contrary, definitely like affirm that one should use it. But we do keep in mind it ultimately kind of goes back to the faith and reason type thing. So there is something that, is ultimately not going to be questioned, whether you want to call it a presupposition or faith. I think they operate by the same mechanism. So with that is ultimately something that one should be cognizant of. Does that kind of make sense?
So, forgive me, I'm still kind of on the same point. It seems as if, so maybe I can just ask you a couple like yes or no questions to see if I'm misunderstanding anywhere.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
Do you hold that if intellectualism is left unchecked, it will at least sometimes arrive at nihilism? I think I would agree with that too, at least sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. I think that is the conclusion of it.
Okay. So I guess let me ask the next question, and then I'll say no to this one. But do you think that the only correct ending of intellectualism left unchecked is nihilism?
Yes, because there are backdrops that, you have this clear backdrop right here, which is the church. I think there are other backdrops prior to that, which are not going to be, which I'm not sure you're considering necessarily. And I don't want to offend you, but that's largely kind of what I'm seeing here. And so I think if rationalism is left unchecked, it's going to batter against those as well.
That's good.
Until
that's
it does it into nihilism, if that makes sense.
That's totally satisfactory. And then the next question is, do you think that the church puts like a backdrop in place to prevent your intellect from being operated do you think that the church has backdrops to stop your intellect from running amok?
I don't know. I think it's not the only institution that.
I'm not asking if it's the only one. I'm just asking if it does.
Well, let me kind of think. I don't even want to say the only institution. I think that there are everybody and their brother, including you, me, whatever. We all kind of have our own little backdrops that, if left unchecked, the church has an explicit one. Maybe others don't have an explicit one, but we do away with all of it. I'm
not worried about like me or you or anything. I'm just worried about
So I'm just kind of saying kind of in the grander scheme of things. So I guess if you want to kind of define it that, I still don't see them as opposites of one another. I think the church definitely emphasizes the use of reason and intellect kind of within that regard. Um, so, yeah, that makes sense.
But
I don't think it.
I'm not sure if I got a clear yes or no. So I guess let me just. Do you think that the church has instituted backdrops to prevent reason from being fully from? Do you think the church has instituted backdrops to stop people from letting their intellect run amok?
I think church formalized it. I think they always exist, regardless.
But you think that the church did institute these backdrops?
I mean, I think the church formalized it. I think they exist regardless of if the church formalized it or not. I'll say that. I think that sufficiently answers your question.
So I'm not sure that I agree because like nobody was bound to believe, no Catholics were bound to believe the Assumption of Mary before the
1870 was it? I think it was 1870.
I thought the Assumption was like the 1940s or something. Whatever.
I don't think so.
There was at least like 1800 years where no Catholic was bound to believe it, and then there was 200 years where there were.
Mm-hmm.
Roughly.
But with that said, I think this is kind of turning into more development of doctrine type conversation. Where,
no, I'm still definitely on the backdrop. Like I'm not worried about the particular instance of this dogma. I just like the fact that it used to be the case that this backdrop did not exist, but now this backdrop does exist.
Yeah.
So the church has instituted backdrops to prevent the use of reason, right?
Well, what's the ultimate backdrop? I mean, you can say the Assumption of Mary is like one backdrop, so to speak, but what's the ultimate backdrop prior to that is that the church is the infallible interpreter of God. So that backdrop in terms of that has not changed. And so
I don't care if it's changed or not. I'm just interested to see if the church has instituted any.
So that's the ultimate, that is the more penultimate backdrop in my...
That's fine. Yeah. But like that one particular dogma was one backdrop, not the ultimate one, but it was one.
Yeah. I mean,
and it will stop the use of the intellect beyond that point. Like that new dogma serves as a new backdrop.
Do you think it could invite the use of the intellect as opposed to it?
I do not.
Why not?
Because the church has settled on the matter.
Because, I mean, why couldn't you see, I mean, to me... It doesn't really, I mean, you can say like, oh, okay, yep, Assumption of Mary, it is what it is. Or you can be like, okay, well, why was this believed by, any scholastics like Duns Scotus? Was this believed in the first millennium? To me, it would almost kind of invite, kind of the use of the intellect to see why this was codified in the first place, which I think the Catholic Church would be more than happy to be like, yeah, go, I mean, take a look for yourself. Like this was, I mean, Duns Scotus, he kind of codified, what was it, the Immaculate Conception. So, I mean, that's a dogma as well. I mean, so if that was dogmatized in, the 19th century, it's not as if, a Catholic reads that, it's like, oh, okay, I guess I got to believe that. I mean, a lot of them would like look into that and be like, I wonder kind of, is this codified? Is this, if we go back into the scholastics in the first millennium, would we see, this being believed? So that's largely kind of how I see, the Catholic Church, codifying dogma. To me, it's almost in terms of it and being an invitation to like look more into why they did what they did. It wasn't just like, oh, Assumption of Mary, we're deciding it one day. So that's one of the ways I see it.
So I certainly don't disagree that the church would invite you to explore why they came to the ultimate decision that they did, but the church would not invite you to disagree. The church would let you know, no, to be a Catholic in good standing, you have to come to the same conclusion that we did.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you want to remain like a, kind of within the church.
Precisely, and that's why I'm calling it the Catholic Church and not like all of Christianity anti-intellectual. Like this is a uniquely Catholic thing, in my opinion.
I still don't. I mean, if we define anti-intellectual as against the use of the intellect, I still don't necessarily agree. So I still think they're encouraging you to kind of look into it and kind of look why into this was necessarily codified. Ultimately, the one backdrop that the Catholic Church wants you to consider is that it is the church mounted by Christ. Well,
that's not the one. They have all these other backdrops as well. That might be the last one, like the ultimate.
That's the ultimate one, and that's ultimately the one that they want you to kind of abide by. And that, since
they want you to abide by all of them.
Well, that's like the main one. That is the main one.
Sure, but they're all main in the sense that you can't be a Catholic in good standing and disagree with any of the dogma.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but this is kind of like, think of it in terms of your parents, right? So you think of like the big backdrop for your mom and dad is obey your parents, like the fourth commandment, whatever. So I mean, one of the backdrops could be like, you got to make your bed every day, you got to clean your room like once a week, something like that. And so I mean, you can consider those kind of backdrops as well. But I mean, ultimately, the one backdrop which is like forever standing and stuff like that is obey your parents. And so as you get older, it can change. It can be like, okay, well, take your car in for an oil change once every 3 months, so stuff kind of like that. I mean, so to me, but the one has kind of remained universal and kind of unstanding. You kind of see what I'm saying? So to me, that's kind of the ultimate backdrop. I mean, yes, abide by the assumption. I think they're inviting you to kind of look into why they did it. But I mean, that's ultimately
as long as you eventually come to the same conclusion as them.
I mean, yeah.
And that's what I call anti-intellectual.
I don't. It kind of goes back to, I guess, the purpose of the Catholic Church is, to get people into heaven. So, and I don't.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was saying earlier, where you might actually agree with me, but just say that no, it's a good thing to be anti-intellectual because it's all about maximizing the number of souls in heaven.
I think it still goes back to the definition of intellectualism and anti-intellectualism, because I mean, you and I both agree that we can definitely use our intellect to look into why the church has done what it's done. I think it seems like you're right is that we can't come to a different conclusion.
That's anti-intellectualism.
I mean, why? I mean, they're inviting you to use your intellect.
But if you disagree with them, they're not inviting you to use your intellect.
I mean,
they are contrary. You're not allowed to disagree with dogma.
I mean, but you're invited to use your intellect to kind of understand why the dogma is there in the first place.
But you're not invited to disagree.
It seems like, it doesn't seem to me like you're necessarily like your stance is intellectual or anti-intellectual. It seems like you kind of have more not an impetus, that's not the right word. It seems like your concern is largely the will, if that kind of makes sense to me. If that kind of makes sense to you, I'm sorry. But it's like more or less like, yeah, you can use your intellect, but you can't disagree. So, I mean, isn't agreement or disagreement more an act of the will?
So I don't actually think that you control what you agree with or disagree with.
Yeah, you can't will what you will.
Right.
So
because of that, I'm still going to refer to the Catholic Church's stance that you must get in line as being an anti-intellectual stance.
I don't think it's anti-intellectual. I think it's more an issue of the will. I think you are definitely allowed to kind of use your intellect to kind of like, it doesn't preclude the use of the intellect at all. In fact, it encourages it. I was just reading
Catholic in good standing.
I mean, then that's an issue of the will.
You don't choose what you believe, though. I mean, so I don't think that you choose what you believe. Do you?
I mean, you can't will what you will.
Right. So for that reason, the church is inviting you to use their intellect. With that said,
you can use your intellect to kind of influence what you believe and come.
Precisely. Yes, you can use your intellect to influence what you believe. You can only read Catholic sources and just kind of like not read the opposing opinion, and then you can be like, "Yep, I'm in line with Rome. Woohoo! Great, look at me."
I mean,
that's what I did. That's what I did for the first.
You can also read the opposing, opinion. I think that's.
But you can't agree.
But I mean, ultimately, the penultimate backdrop that they really care about. I mean, you can say they have X backdrop, Y backdrop, Z backdrop, but I mean, the one thing that they care about is that, do you believe the Catholic Church is the church founded by Christ?
So that's just not true, though. They don't only care about that one.
It is, though.
No, they don't only care about that one.
Yes, it is.
They care about all the other dogma as well.
No, that's what I just said. I mean, they have.
So the word only in there was not correct.
They have X dogma, Y dogma, Z dogma, whatever. You have to believe, in the real presence. You have to believe in the assumption. But I mean, at the end of the day, the ultimate thing that distinguishes a Catholic from a non-Catholic is, do you believe the Catholic Church is the church founded by Christ? That is what it is. And so that is the penultimate backdrop, or that not the penultimate. That is the ultimate backdrop. Everything else is just more or less kind of a sub backdrop of that. Kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. But these sub backdrops are anti-intellectual.
I mean, I don't think they preclude the use of the intellect. So I think on this one, we're necessarily going to have to agree to disagree.
So if you remember, though, we weren't defining anti-intellectual as straight up preclusion, just as being hostile towards the use of the intellect.
Hostile towards the use of the intellect.
And I really think that we're closer on this than you think, but I think that the negative connotations associated with the word anti-intellectual are kind of like serving as like a roadblock in the discussion. I almost wish that there was like another word that we could use, like a word that meant the same thing. It meant like hostile to the use of the intellect, but it wasn't the word anti-intellectual. Like let's just make up a new word. Yeah.
The thing of it is, I still don't think it's necessarily hostile to the use of the intellect, because I mean, I think there's, I mean, let's maybe think of it in terms of like, you know, the Catholic Church versus like some young Earth creationist Baptist church that, you know.
I'm fine with admitting that young Earth creationist Baptist churches are also anti-intellectual. And I don't want to say
I would agree.
Whataboutism is probably not going to help. You know what I mean?
I mean, so let's talk with regards to like the, you know, the young Earth creationist Baptist church. So a lot of those ones, what they'll kind of teach you is that they teach you more or less what to believe. Like this happened, versus my experience in Catholicism, they tell you largely what to believe. And largely back to the Baptists, they teach you that what to believe insofar as, you know, it's in the Bible. This can be a really big question, whatever. So, you know, the Catholic Church, in my experience, more or less kind of teaches you kind of similarly what to believe in terms of that, but it also kind of advises you why this is why we believe what we believe. This is largely kind of, you know, church instituted by Christ and all of that. So in that instance, it's a little bit different. I think the church definitely, I mean, if we kind of go back to the definition of dogma in the Catholic Encyclopedia, I mean, I don't think they preclude the use of intellect whatsoever.
I don't think they preclude it either, but I think it's hostile to it.
It's hostile to it. So, I mean,
And this is why I'm saying I think that you and I are closer than it might appear. Like, the whole thing that you said about like the main goal of the church is getting souls to heaven and keeping them out of hell, and then dogma exists as like a tool.
I think you're latching onto that maybe a little bit more than I would. I think we're further away because of our definition of the word faith. I think that's definitely, you know, I'm not a fideist. It seems to me like, correct me if I'm wrong, but at this point, kind of in your intellectual journey, you are a fideist, relying more on the side of reason. Reason and faith are hostile to one another. You agree with that, and you fall on the side of reason. See, I am not a fideist, and I believe they work in tandem with one another. So I don't think that we are necessarily as far in agreement as you like to think, and I think it largely pertains to the use of the word faith.
I'm not sure where faith actually comes into this.
So we're talking in terms of, epistemology. We're talking in terms of like, you know, dogmas, you must have faith in order to kind of believe these dogmas. So with regards to that, I think the concept of what constitutes faith is definitely very relevant in this conversation.
I'm not certain how.
You're not certain how? I mean, well, a dogma, you agree that it's anti-intellectual, right? That those are your words.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does one come to a dogma? They have faith in that dogma, faith which is, in your view, contrary to reason.
So I think that faith actually doesn't need to come into the equation here. I think that really we can kind of like ignore faith pretty much entirely. I think that really the only thing that we're talking about here is like intellectual pursuits. So like you can arrive at a dogma through faith, and I'll just kind of give you the thumbs up and be like, okay, like, you know, I'm glad that you got there somehow, I guess. Have a good one. But then if you're able to use the intellect to like falsify that dogma, and you are willing to be like, oh yeah, in that case, then I would drop my belief in the dogma, then I'm not going to call you anti-intellectual. Even if you did use faith to arrive at that dogma, the anti-intellectualism actually has nothing to do with the faith and everything to do with whether or not you're willing to admit that the dogma itself would be dropped if you had enough reason to drop it.
Gotcha. Sorry, my wife just let the dogs out.
That's okay.
So I got slightly distracted, but to kind of go back to it, I do think it kind of does pertain to largely to faith with regards to the dogma. So I think it sounds to me like you kind of have a lot of the issues. You kind of have an issue with kind of what's to consider the doxastic attitude one kind of has towards dogmas as being something which necessarily cannot be, you know, falsified in some way, shape, or form. So that largely kind of seems to me to be kind of your issue with it. Maybe was there somebody, or I don't know. That's probably not the right question, but what was I going to say? So it largely seems like dogmas, in your view, are anti-intellectual because you see them as something which cannot be questioned.
Yeah.
They themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Sorry, I got distracted again.
Sorry.
All good. Hi.
Hi.
So, yeah. So I do. Getting back to the definition of faith, I do think. Sorry, I get distracted easy sometimes.
So do I. It's all right.
So, but where were we? Jeepers, where
we
were
we talking about faith and whether or not faith actually needs to come into the conversation at all here.
Sure. So I mean, you believe having the dogma is anti-intellectual. Mm-hmm. So correct. Mm-hmm. So kind of against the use of reason. So how would one? So if somebody investigates a dogma intellectually and then finds it kind of on the opposite, but they use faith to kind of decide to go into it, where does that kind of play in?
So the faith doesn't come in at all, in my opinion. Okay. The anti-intellectualism relies solely on the intellect. So if somebody used their intellect and realized that they disagreed with the dogma, and let's say that they had really good evidence against the dogma, but they mm-hmm. said, I will not allow this evidence. I will not consider this evidence. I'm just mm-hmm. simply going to ignore all the evidence and just agree with the church. That is hostile to the use of the intellect, and that's anti-intellectual. So the faith actually doesn't need to come into it, really. If you use faith to arrive at your dogma, great. But if you didn't use faith to arrive at your dogma...
Does faith have any... So does the intellect... So are you kind of conflating with reason then? So does faith have no bearing on kind of whether one uses their intellect?
I would not
because you think
that we would define faith in the same way that we define the word intellect.
Okay, so maybe we should kind of define intellect here. So an intellect is more or less the rational faculties of the mind. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So would faith be considered a rational faculty of the mind?
So I guess it depends on what you mean by it. If you mean trust, then I would say yes. If you mean Ephesians, then I would say no.
See, and I don't make a distinction between the two of those. I think they're two ways of saying kind of the same thing. They're both alluding to faith.
Let me ask this. Actually, no, I don't even need to. I don't think that faith really comes into the conversation at all here. This is strictly an intellectual.
But is faith not a process of the intellect? I mean, reason is a process of the intellect. You would agree with that. So would faith also be a process of the intellect?
What do you mean by faith?
What do I mean by faith? I mean, as trust or Ephesians or kind of however else.
Trust and Ephesians are different because trust
I don't agree. I think they are the same. They're saying largely the same thing.
Okay. Without using the word Ephesians, what do you mean by faith?
Hebrew, not Ephesians.
Or I'm sorry, that's me. That's my fault.
You're fine.
That's my fault.
Hebrews.
So. Without using the word Hebrews or Ephesians, what do you mean by faith?
What I mean by faith, I would just simply define it as trust.
Okay, then yes, faith is an intellectual pursuit. If you're basing your belief in something off of past occurrences of it or just other evidence, then yeah, that's an intellectual pursuit.
Okay, so I don't see a difference between that and the Hebrews definition. We can maybe kind of go back and forth on that.
That's a conversation for another time. That's
a conversation for another time.
Yep.
So,
I'm willing to use the word faith the way that you use it. That's not a problem for me.
So using the word faith that I'm using it, you are kind of admitting that faith is a faculty of the intellect.
Yeah, because since faith just means trust is a faculty of the intellect because you're trusting for a reason, I would presume. Okay. And so by that, the law of non-contradiction would say that faith is therefore a use of the intellect as well.
So therefore, a dogma is a use of faith. Is that correct? Basically, dogmas come into play largely by faith. So if someone has faith in a dogma...
I would disagree.
If someone has faith in a dogma or if one kind of arrives to a dogma by use of reason, more or less, we can both agree that they have arrived to this dogma intellectually. Is that correct?
If someone somehow used trust, meaning faith, to arrive at a dogma, mm-hmm. I would really want to dive into that because I'm not sure how you could trust a dogma. Like, it's not like the Assumption of Mary is something that happened tons of times. We empirically validated it. And so just like, oh yeah, like Mary assumed into heaven one more time. You could trust that. You could have faith in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure how you would use faith for like a one-time event. You know what I mean? Like, for which
yeah, but I mean, faith as trust or anything like that. And I mean, I've kind of defined it previously as, having trust that the Catholic Church is the one true church, and then we have all these kind of sub backdrops kind of against it. So if we have faith that the Catholic Church is the one true church, which is the faculty of the intellect, which we have just defined, and they institute this dogma, more or less, we can have faith in this dogma that is correct because it is sub-dogma of the Roman Catholic Church is the one true church. And then we can also use our reason and our intellect to kind of look into what it is, while ultimately having the faith that it is a correct dogma, since we have faith in the greater dogma that the Catholic Church is the one true church.
So I don't see how you could trust that the church was the one true church, because it's not like you have tons of other one true churches and you're like, oh yeah, the Catholic Church is just the same as all the other one true churches. Mm-hmm. So therefore, so I'm not sure how the word trust would actually apply here. The word faith. I
mean, you can look into it. I mean,
it's actually one of my contentions that a lot of religious people actually use the word faith in two different ways and then conflate the two. In one way, they use it as trust, but then in another way, they use it in the Hebrews way, and they conflate the two when they're really different. They're different. Like that's why the word.
I don't necessarily agree with that. So with regarding, we can say having faith in the one true church or having trust in the one true church. I mean, we can also kind of use our intellect by looking through things like apostolic succession or even Eucharistic miracles, or kind of looking at it throughout history. And then looking at it looking at it typologically, like I know the Swansona typological Eliakim argument for the papacy, kind of how that arose. So we can use our intellect in those ways. And then using that in tandem with faith to have faith that the Catholic Church is the one true church, while using our intellect to kind of bolster that as well. So
I'm actually going to go ahead and just concede all of these points to you and then say, okay, so we've used our intellect and our intellect. We've used our intellect and our trust. We've used our intellect and our faith. I'm just saying the same thing in three different ways.
Okay. We can say we've used our reason and our faith. Does that kind of...
Yeah, or our intellect and our intellect, since we're talking, they're all the same. So,
yes.
So we've used our intellect and our intellect to believe that a dogma is true.
Okay.
I still think it's anti-intellectual to say that nothing can change my mind. And I think that we just disagree. No, sorry. I don't think that we disagree that it's hostile to the use of reason. I think that you just don't want to use the word because of the negative connotation, which is there. Like, admitted. I mean, the word has a negative connotation.
I mean, it's not even that it's a use of a negative connotation. I mean, if you want, I just haven't been shown that it's anti-intellectual. Like, if something's anti-intellectual, I can kind of admit it, but I have not been shown that it is the fact, because we agree
I think I could do it with a single question.
Okay.
If we found the body of Mary, the Mother of God, would you admit that the dogma of the bodily resurrection of Mary, the bodily assumption of Mary into heaven, is false?
That would be that's a very good question. Would it be proof?
Let me not even make you answer the question. Let me tell you how I would respond to yes and no, and then let you take it from there, because it's rude for me to put you on the spot like that.
No, for sure. I think I'm just thinking of it in terms of like an actual real world experience, like breaking news, we found supposedly the body of Mary.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt, we found it.
And
we
to me, I would be like, I'd almost be kind of skeptical. And so I would need to kind of observe it for myself.
Imagine you observe it for yourself. You look at the DNA sequencing. They're able to prove it beyond like whatever proof you require, you have it. We're giving me the best possible, like with the strongest possible case.
Okay.
Given all of that, if you would still not drop your belief in the dogma of the bodily assumption of Mary into heaven, I would say that that's being anti-intellectual. But if you would say, yes, I would drop my belief in the dogma, I'd say that's not anti-intellectual. But if you did drop your belief in that dogma, you'd no longer be a Catholic in good standing, because the Catholic Church requires it's the language that they use is it's obligate. The Catholic Church obligates her members to.
the body of Mary was found tomorrow, I think the church would probably give a statement.
I'm sure they
And
would,
I would read
because
those
it'd be
statements,
falsified.
see what it was that they were saying, so I could at least kind of gather some information on that. So I mean, I don't know if it just came to me and me personally as like some weird private revelation. That would be.
It's for the whole world.
I'd largely be skeptical because I believe that's being skepticism is a use of the intellect, right? So yeah, so it's a very strange hypothetical, which you kind of put into a vacuum. It gets a little bit tricky. So I'd wait to see what the church would have to say on something like that. I would investigate the evidence for myself. It wouldn't be something that I would just kind of do
in my hypothetical. You investigate the evidence and you find enough evidence that your intellect would have you believe that really is the body of Mary. So whatever evidence you need, you have in this hypothetical. Also in this hypothetical, the church comes out with a statement saying, we don't care if that's the body of Mary or not. We have a dogma and you have to believe it. In this hypothetical, it's purely hypothetical.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I don't think the church, I mean, we can hypothetical all day. The church kind of orders everybody to kill themselves or something like that. But I mean, I guess I'm relaying it kind of back to the real world, how the church would actually respond. That's kind of what because we can hypothetical kind of anything.
I mean, the hypothetical should be easy, right? This should be very easy for you. You should just be able to be like, oh yeah, I would realize that dogma was false, right?
I mean,
I'm not sure why you're hesitating.
Because I mean, there's a lot of other factors kind of at play here. So I mean, it's not it's not something easily that you can I don't know. You can, like I said, you can hypothetical kind of anything all day long.
Right, and this is purely hypothetical, and this will never happen. So you lose nothing by admitting that you would admit that the dogma is false. Because we're never going to find the body of the mother of Jesus. We're never going to, no, it's not going to happen. So you have nothing to lose with this answer because it's never going to happen. This hypothetical will never happen. You have nothing to lose by simply admitting yeah, I would drop my belief in that dogma for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd probably try to at least reconcile it.
That's anti-intellectual.
That's anti-intellectual? I mean, why?
Because it's hostile to the use of your intellect. You have all the evidence that you need.
My intellect to rationalize it. Why would it be necessarily hostile to the use of intellect? And it's just...
In my hypothetical, you have all of the evidence that you need to convince you that truly was the body of Mary, the Mother of God.
Okay. I simply just don't think it's going to be necessarily this black and white.
Me neither. But just for the sake of the hypothetical, it is this black and white.
I mean, okay. So, yeah. I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, I think it's cool that you admit that you don't know how you would actually react. It's honest. It's very honest of you to admit, yeah, I don't know how I would react. But this hypothetical might have helped you see that the one answer is hostile to the intellect while the other one is not. And so because the church obligates her members to say, no, I don't care that we found her body. I'm still going to believe that Mary was ascended bodily and soul into heaven. Anyway, that is hostile.
Let's go back in the hypothetical. So you say, I'm going to ask you a hypothetical now. So say this did happen and, you're not a Catholic or anything like that. How do you think the church would respond? As somebody who was raised Catholic, and so say there was some anthropologist that said, hey, this arose this is the mother of God. How do you think the church would respond? Do you think they would say no, you can't do that? Or would you say, okay, well, in the light of new evidence, this is kind of development of doctrine, right?
The trads would deny. And
I think it depends on the trad in question.
Huh?
I think it depends on the trad in question.
The SSPX and the FSSP would.
You think they would?
Yeah.
Okay.
The FSPX and the FSSP still believe in the Shroud of Turin and stuff. So, and the breast milk of Mary and stuff like that. They've got some pretty crazy beliefs, dude. Anyway, I think that there would be a sect of Catholics who do, but I think that if somebody if Pope Francis was in office when this happened, I do think that Pope Francis would be oh, development of doctrine. And then it's just like, okay, so what does dogma even mean? If we can just get rid of dogma willy-nilly when new evidence comes up, then it's not dogma in the first place. Dogma has a meaning. Dogma means you cannot go back on this. But if you can go back on it, it's not dogma. So that would be, so I don't know how the church would react.
I think development of dogma is something that is largely misunderstood.
No, the church does not develop dogma. The church develops doctrine. There's a big difference. Yeah.
Yep.
Dogma does not develop.
Yep.
And my argument is not that doctrine is anti-intellectual. No. My argument is that dogma is anti-intellectual. There's a very, like, the words are similar, but the difference is critical.
Yeah. Yep. And I don't really agree. I think one can use their intellect to kind of arrive at the dogma, and I think this conversation largely kind of does come. I know you don't necessarily agree, but I do think it kind of comes back to largely the relationship kind of between faith and reason. I think that's largely kind of what it comes back to.
So let me ask you. I'm going to return to the hypothetical to which you answered, I don't know, which is an honest answer.
Okay.
So the church is in the situation where they say, no, you must still believe the dogma, but you are convinced that it really is Mary, the mother of God's body, and you don't know how you'd react. Would you agree with me that allowing your intellect to, so by admitting that you are convinced that dogma is false, is intellectually honest? And then would you further agree, or would you disagree, that saying I'm going to ignore all the evidence and I'm just going to worry about the dogma is anti-intellectual? Like, would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, at that point, you're kind of suspending your own intellect.
Okay,
So,
good. We got to a point of agreement. Woo!
I think here's the thing. I know you are an agnostic at this point, and you lean more towards kind of on the atheist side of things. But I'm a Catholic and I'm a theist, and I'm actually extremely kind of convicted of the theism position. I think God gave us a mind. God gave us an intellect. God gave us reason for use of kind of determining kind of how to come about truth in the world. So this can be through the natural sciences or through philosophy, through mathematics, and then kind of through divine revelation. So God gave us a brain. He wants us to use it. So simple as.
Cool, man. Keep using it. That's all I gotta,
Exactly. No, this was good. Yeah, are you kind of a philosophy guy? I know you're kind of
philosophy guy. I've never taken a philosophy course in my life. My engineering degree, shockingly, did not include any philosophy, but I do like to read it on the side. Like to engage in the comment section of philosophy.
What do you like
videos.
To? Have you read any like Plato or Aristotle or anything like that?
And
you mentioned that you're against kind of teleology, which I actually found extremely interesting. I think I believe in final causes. So it's kind of interesting. You're kind of against teleology. So you've read like Plato and Aristotle, and then like maybe some of the like pre-Socratics or anything like that?
None of the pre-Socratics really, but I've read like Plato, Aristotle, and then Thomas.
Okay, some Aquinas too.
Yeah,
gotcha.
The Summa.
Have you read any like Augustine or like Pseudo-Dionysius?
I've read portions of Confessions by Augustine, but not the whole thing, man. I mean, I haven't read the whole Summa either.
Yeah, City of God's a tank, man. It's a freaking it's humongous. Have you read any of like any Maimonides or like Averroes?
No, not really.
None of that.
My main like teleological disagreements are, I mean, honestly, primarily Thomas Aquinas, because Catholics, for the most part, care less about Aristotle and more about like Thomism. So I spend way more time reading like the Summa and stuff like that than I do Aristotle. But I read Aristotle enough to actually understand where Thomas was coming from.
See, kind of what's talking about. I would recommend. I don't know how much time you have or how much interest in the subject that you have, but maybe look at some of the Islamic scholastic commentaries on Aristotle. I think Avicenna had a pretty good one.
Okay.
And then I don't know. I kind of like more of the contemporary continental stuff. Like I'm thinking of like your Zizeks and your Derridas and stuff like that. Kind of your more postmodern. I do actually really like the Pomo guys, which makes me anathema in some trad circles. So that's why I don't consider myself a trad whatsoever. So and then there's like Gassendi and Descartes and all that stuff. So which is kind of some cool stuff. Yeah, I don't know. It's deep, man. It's deep.
Yeah. Maybe
So
next time we'll do like a whole discussion on teleology. Maybe next time.
yeah, we could definitely do that.
Cool.
Yeah, no, this is good, man. I appreciate it. So you're a very generous conversation partner. So I am glad we clarified stuff. And to any viewers of yours who may know me in kind of the comments, I promise I'm not as much of a dick in real life that I am on the YouTube comment
And
section.
I can now verify this as true because I've now had a conversation in, well, real life, right? Video chat, but still.
Yeah, video chat.
But this is way closer to real life than a YouTube comment section. So
Exactly. There's a person on the end of all of your comments, and I'm speaking to myself too because I forget it sometimes too. But I don't know. Be kind, I guess.
yeah. And in my opinion, there's nothing quite like face to face, and I'm including video chat in face to face because
Yeah.
as long as you can see the person that you're talking with face, it's like a lot harder to be a jerk because like you're actually talking to like a real human. So
Yeah, you can't like be like you dumb ding dong like on the
right.
YouTube section. So it's I don't know. These conversations are good, so I think we came to at least a little bit more of a mutual understanding. We don't agree, but I think we came, slightly closer.
Yeah, I think that we were able to really hone in on like what we actually disagree on because I feel like so much of like YouTube comment level disagreement is just talking past each other, and I think that you and I did a really good job today at not talking past each other. I think that we did a really good job defining our terms. I think that we did a really good job drilling down onto what we agree on and what we disagree on, and then okay. We talked about what we disagreed on, and we didn't wind up, on the exact same page. But I think that we did the most important part, which was finding out what we disagree about, and then identifying it, kind of explaining why we disagree on that one issue with each other, and then that's it. Like, that's the most important part in my opinion. So
yeah, so no, it's definitely probably some more to come, I would say. So
cool.
Well, sweet man. No, it's been fun. So let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, man, it was good talking to you.
Yeah, take care.